Hello, my name is Roma. In today's video I will show you the best GoPro Hero 10 video settings for any situation in a studio during the day or in low light. Let's begin with the fundamental settings that will apply to any scenario. These settings will not be changed on a regular basis, but will remain constant in all shooting conditions. The first setting is frame rate. Because I live in Thailand, which uses the PAL video format, I am shooting in 25p. If you live in the United States, you should shoot in 24p or 30p. Lens I recommend setting to wide or linear for 90% of the time. It will look much more natural than super view. Bitrate set to high for the best possible video quality. Sharpness set to low or medium. I set mine to low because I can always add sharpness in post-production. If you don't have time, simply leave it at medium. Color, I recommend shooting in flat for the most natural looking dynamic range and skin tones. I've made a whole video about GoPro color and color profiles. You can watch it right here. For the screen shortcuts, I have ISO minimum, ISO maximum, white balance, and lens. I chose these settings because they are the ones I change the most. Finally, I recommend that you use spot metering or exposure lock. If you don't know how it works, here's a quick guide. Hold your finger down on the back screen until a small white box appears, then drag the white box to the location where you want your GoPro to auto-expose. Tap the white box again and your exposure is now locked. Instead of fiddling with settings, you basically tell your GoPro to lock the exposure to a specific area in the frame. So for example, if you want to expose for the sky, you're going to put the white box there, lock the exposure and shoot your video. I use this feature all the time, especially in bright daylight conditions. Resolution set to 5.3K. This will give it the best image quality and more options in post-production. ISO minimum maximum should be set to 100, 200. Anything higher is unnecessary when shooting in bright daylight conditions. Maintaining a low ISO will result in better image quality. White balance should be set to roughly 5500 Kelvin, but if it's cloudy you can go higher to like 6500 Kelvin. Hyper smooth set to high for optimal image stabilization. Set the AV compensation to -0.5 to -1. The reason for this is that the GoPro tends to overexpose the image, making it look amateurish. On a typical sunny day, set the AV compensation to -0.5. If it's really bright outside, you can even set it to -1. However, if you're going to use the previously discussed white box with spot metering exposure lock, the AV compensation should be set to 0. If you don't, the image will be underexposed. So basically, when you let the GoPro automatically choose the exposure, you should set the AV compensation to -0.5 or -1, depends how sunny it is. But if you're going to manually lock the exposure, set the AV compensation to 0. Shutter set to automatic and let the GoPro decide what shutter speed to use. If you use ND filters, I would recommend not to go below 1/200 because it will affect the performance of Hypersmooth. I've made a whole video about this right here. But if you use a gimbal, you don't have to worry about any of this. You can put the shutter speed to 1/50, double the frame rate, enjoy the natural motion blur and have great stabilization. Let's get into the studio settings now. Set the resolution to 4K, not 5.3K. The reason for this is that in 5.3K, the image becomes noisier in darker environments. Again, I've made a whole video about this. You can watch it right here. ISO minimum maximum should be set to 100. This will produce the least amount of noise, but will require the use of extremely powerful studio lights. Personally, I use a 60-watt light, which works perfectly. AV compensation, just leave it at 0. In a studio setting, you don't want the GoPro to over or underexpose. Shutter you should set to double the frame rate. In my case, it's 1/50. This will give it the most exposure without affecting the motion blur in the image. White balance should be set to the light source you're using in the studio. Because I use a 5500 Kelvin light, I set my white balance to 5500 Kelvin. And the final setting is hyper smooth, which should be completely disabled if your camera will be mounted on a tripod. However, if you want to include movement shots, for the best experience, I recommend using a gimbal. Set the resolution to 4K for the same reasons you would in a studio. ISO minimum maximum, try not to go above 800 if possible. But of course, if you don't have a choice, you can bring it up slightly. If you compensation, just leave it at 0. Shutter, you should set double the frame rate. But this will drastically affect the performance of Hyper Smooth. Unfortunately, Hyper Smooth heavily relies on shutter speed, and if you're going to bring the shutter speed down, the Hyper Smooth performance is not going to be the best. Therefore, I would highly recommend to use a gimbal when shooting in low light. White balance you should set to roughly 4500 Kelvin, depending on the source of the light. That's all for today. I hope this video helps you figure out what settings to use with your GoPro 10 in different shooting conditions. Let me know down below if you have any questions or comments, and I guess I will see you in the next one. Bye.